Bryan Munson of Husker Online is our guest. Bryan, long time no chat. How you doing, man?
Dude, I think it's been, 3 weeks since we talked? Because last week you guys were cutting in on some 2025 stuff, and then we had the holiday the week before that. So good to hear your voice again.
Good to hear from you as well. Before we get into the fun stuff, do you want to talk about last night, or are we moving on?
Well, I think as soon as the concussion happened in the first half, I kind of knew it was going to be difficult, and they did not get out of playing man-to-man. Oh, my goodness, really? I think that was kind of a challenge to their secondary in the first place, but then you lose a guy, and you put Elam back there, which I think we can kind of say now that is not a great fit for Buffalo. He was on skates all night long. They've got to shore some things up defensively, clearly. I mean, they got back half, both of their defensive ends went away in the first and basically in the game. How many times did you say the word Epineza last night? Not at all.
Not many.
I didn't even hear it. And honestly, Russo barely made much of a dent in what the Chiefs had going on either. So I think the offensive side of the football is fine. I think the guard play's got to get a little bit better. But yeah, I think things have got to get really a lot better in that second half for the secondary for Buffalo. That's a big got to be a big emphasis for them in the draft and free agency.
Is that mostly personnel? Do you think that's a coaching element to it, or a combination of both?
Well, think about this, Coach Butler. Mm-hmm. Where did he come from?
Buffalo.
What was he? What happened to him, and how things happened at Buffalo? He was kind of the scapegoat and kind of left out there to kind of leave and be, have all these things cast on him. What failed last night? It was a secondary. So I don't think those are great. I don't think those are coincidences. I think that there's some personnel issues there. And look, I love me some DeMar Hamlin. I love me some Hamlin, and his story is incredible. But the inability for him to match up great with a real legitimate pass catching tight end like he saw last night with Kelsey, just explains to me that you need to go get a longer, rangier, more athletic safety, and you might be able to slide him down to play some rover stuff. He's not opposed to put his head in there and stick his nose in some places where it shouldn't be. But he plays bigger than what he is. He's limited physically. I just feel like you need a bigger, longer, rangier free to put out there. So I don't know. They've got to do some major work in their secondary.
Speaking of going and getting players, Bryan, that's why we like to talk to you quite a bit, is because you follow who Nebraska is trying to go get in the recruiting realm for Husker Online. A lot of offers have gone out over the last few weeks. What are you noticing from the guys that Nebraska's offering? Is there any sort of trend, or is it just throwing stuff at a wall and seeing what sticks right now for Nebraska?
Well, I think there's a little bit of that.
Okay.
But no, I think last week, some things that I picked up on was they're really trying to get back into IMG Academy. I think there's probably 4 or 5 offers to IMG guys out there in Bradenton, Florida, which I think obviously it's, I think in recent years, people probably would say that, there's a Bishop Gorman or Mater Day and, IMG out there, and you've got some other kind of prep schoolish places up there in the Northeast too. They've got kind of a name for themselves when it comes to being a perennial Division I kind of talent development school. But IMG seems to be loaded again, because I think Nebraska offered, like I said, 4 or 5 guys across 26, 27, and 28. And honestly, mainly probably 27 and 28, but you had a guy like Brett Kolajay, who's already there, an offensive tackle that's got Nebraska in his top 7, who's visited Nebraska a couple times. He's originally from Colorado. So there's some real nice things that they're doing there in Florida. Credit Coach Simpson, obviously, who just joined the staff again after he left Florida State. They have been working the state of Texas, which obviously that's got to have some segments for them a little bit, because Coach McGuire, he obviously had his place to kind of play at within the Metroplex. He was very much like a Cedar Hill, DeSoto, Lancaster, like the southern area, basically of the Dallas area, the Dallas Metroplex, kind of mid cities. He's very busy, like down that way. So, so Nebraska is obviously trying to get back into the state of Texas a little bit. I thought it was just incredible how many 2028s that they have offered. In fact, they offered a couple more today. So I think that that's really kind of shocking to me. I mean, you start talking about 14, 15-year-old kids that are picking up these Division I offers. You wonder, how many of them, and honestly, my son's a 14-year-old 2028 himself, and he's got a wide receiver at his school that's already picked up offers from like San Diego State and UNT with no varsity film whatsoever. So you're sitting there wondering about the evaluation process, and you really, that offer is just that. It's an evaluation offer. It's kind of an extension of, we're interested. Let's just see where this thing kind of goes. So nothing committable, obviously, to those things. But I think we're really watching what kind of happens here. Kansas is locked down their borders pretty hard here in the recent weeks when it comes to players. I think Nebraska was interested in a couple of them they had offered. So keep an eye on that. And then obviously we have the upcoming, Junior Day on February 1st.
Another guy that intrigued me that got an offer was in the 26 class, Zion Ely. He's the number one prospect in the 2026 class. I'm seeing him committed to Maryland with maybe some Oregon sniffing around. Does Nebraska have a chance with him, or what's the purpose of extending an offer to a guy who's already committed somewhere and then has some other big name programs on the list?
Yeah. So I think that the feeling there, obviously, is he doesn't end up at Terrapin. And so you want to kind of throw your hat, obviously, into that kind of into the ring with him to kind of, see what your chances are. Maybe he's still a Big Ten guy, and maybe, and now all of a sudden, it's kind of it's a little bit more of a level playing field. I mean, the more and more things have kind of changed from, I'm going there because of the tradition. I'm going there because of this, that, and the other thing. There's so much of this now. It's a business trip. It's a business decision, and I think that is kind of changing the reasons why some of these things happen the way that they do. So I think that's something to kind of keep an eye on there as well. But I think that the reasonable reasoning there with him and the offer and the fact that he's already committed and stuff like that, I think that there's probably good reason to doubt that he ends up signing with Maryland.
Does Nebraska offer a lot of guys like that are a little shaky on their commitment, or is this kind of a special circumstance since he's the number one overall player in the class?
I think that's just kind of, I think the fact that he's committed to Maryland is kind of the ironic piece. I think Nebraska, not having offered the number one player in the 2026 class until a couple of weeks ago is the other. I felt like probably, and it's such a huge need for them, obviously, in the class, right? So I think maybe what happened there is you kind of had a kid that had come off the board. Maybe you think like you got the dream offer and that was it. And then all of a sudden, like what you had said, a couple more schools sniffing around on him a little bit. Now he's talking about maybe taking some trips. Might as well go ahead and start to try to get involved there with the number one player in the country.
Fair enough. And when I look at that from a Nebraska perspective, Bryan, on the one hand, I think it's good to see the Huskers still, trying to land these elite talents and go after them. But we also haven't seen Nebraska had a lot of success in actually getting them to campus and seeing these guys play a role. In your mind, is it still worthwhile for Nebraska to make these offers, spend this time going through this film and getting to know these players on the off chance that they like you maybe more than the previous ones did and you get them to campus? Or should Nebraska maybe, back off on some of these bigger named, higher rated guys and lean more into the under the radar gems and developmental type of program like they said they want to be?
Well, I think you make a compelling kind of situation there between the two, because you can, I think what you got there is kind of a stake in the sizzle. You've got a situation, obviously, there with the number one player in the country. What's the realistic expectation that Nebraska can get that guy? How many times has Nebraska gotten that guy before? I mean, once, here in the last 3 years, like with a Raiola. Now we're talking about the number one player in the country. Couldn't do it last year, when that offensive tackle decides to go to Ohio State or wherever it was that he went from North Carolina. I'm just sitting there going, I think Nebraska has a method to the madness, and that is, if you don't try, you don't know. And
Sure.
you have got to put your best foot forward because you know that he's a game changer. You know that he's a difference maker. He is a disruptive kind of dude that if you got him to Lincoln, you know that he's going to make your team almost instantly better. And I think that those are the kinds of things that you have to challenge yourself on to say, look, the risk here is minimal. The reward is infinite. I've got to go ahead and make this offer. We may only have one phone conversation before he tells me what his number is or what he's really considering when it comes to things. But I've at least got to go ahead and say, you have an opportunity to come play football at Lincoln. And I think that that's like the minimum amount of effort that you need to make on guys that you know that can come in and help your team. And then after that, if a door is left open, you continue to try to walk through it.
We're talking with Bryan Munson of Husker Online here on our VIP line, brought to you by Aloe Fiber. Let's flip sides of the ball here, Bryan, from defense to offense. Nebraska bringing in a transfer lineman tomorrow from Notre Dame.
Yep.
Rocco Spindler just played for the national championship. Visited Indiana, come to Lincoln tomorrow, might go to Michigan as well. Obviously, Nebraska has gone after some guys in the transfer portal, Bryan. They get Pritchett from Alabama, miss out on Pete from New Mexico State. But
Yep.
Offensive line is a place where there's not always a lot of transfers available, but it's also a position where it's a developmental thing, right? We were so excited over the course of the last year about the Brickses and the Piles and guys like that. And yet it seems like, you're always going to want more depth on the offensive line. Have Husker fans moved on from the young guys in the program too quickly, or is it good that Nebraska's maybe going after a veteran offensive lineman to help shore things up?
Well, I think that Nebraska still has hope, for a couple of guys that you mentioned there, like Pyle and Bricks, because, they were, U.S. Army All-Americans a year ago. They are two guys I know that traveled. I know that Pyle was dealing with an injury. I know Bricks had a lot to kind of, jump up from when he was playing high school football in Iowa. I think that they were two guys that Nebraska really felt like they wanted to keep with, in the program as part of the 105. So I don't think necessarily it's time to fold your cards at all, on either one of those two guys. I just feel like you still have two really unproven but yet talented guys like in the room that if you got like a Spindler who has, I think, just 1 year left of eligibility, you can stick him at either one of the interior guard spots and kind of take the pressure off of somebody else while you give another time, a little bit more time to Bricks and a little bit more time to Pyle and, whomever else they have there at the guard position, that needs just a little bit more. Another example, basically, of how to do the job. You put somebody in front of them like that, you say, watch that kid and you'll be successful. You watch that guy and do what he does and emulate what he does, you can go be successful. And I think it's just another positive thing to kind of help out, being an extension of the coaching staff, so to speak, by bringing a guy in like that and adding him to the roster, adding him to the room. And, you really help, I think, Coach Raiola out with putting together another big piece to that group, and they're in the room. And then I think, you obviously then are giving your chance to develop the guys that you had coming in there a year ago. You have a lot of optimism about. So, and I think that even like a Houston Torres, he looked monstrous in his pictures too. And that's a guy that, he wants to figure into the equation as quickly as possible. And kind of be inflated to follow up, Ben Scott, another guy that was from his high school in Hawaii. So, very interesting kind of group that's being built there in the room. But I think that this is more there to kind of get around just, I'd say, the inexperience that's there with, on some very talented young players.
When you look at a guy like Spindler too, when you say either interior position, are you saying left guard or right guard? Do you think that could be an option at center as well?
No, I don't think he's ever, and I'm trying to remember the article that I read. I know that he had played both interior spots. And in fact, I think maybe it was more right guard, and then the guy that came back had to move over to left because he had kind of entrenched himself there. So I think, obviously, if you're playing in the phone booth, remains kind of the same, from either one of the interior spots. I don't think necessarily guard, although wouldn't be surprised. A lot of those guys learn how to kind of play with the one hand and the off hand. And so that may not be a big reach for him, but I think you've got some guys that are on the team currently that, want to get a look there as well. And I think obviously you have a very successful guy that's played interior line for Notre Dame, and you know that you can pencil him in at one of the two guard spots, and then let the chips play or fall wherever they may then around him.
Do you think Nebraska found something at right guard with Henry Latovsky last year, or do you think that would be a competition for that right guard spot, since that is, to your point, where Spindler played most of the time?
I like Henry. I think he always, that's a guy right there that just, I think he'd go out there bleeding out his eyeballs. I think he's such a tough dude that sometimes, that toughness can kind of get in the way. And I think that he goes out there and probably puts himself in a spot where, maybe health-wise, he might not be able to kind of get the job done, but man, he's gritty. He is totally gritty. I want to see Henry healthy, and I want to see what he can do, being healthy, and that I think is really going to help that unit out. If he could just get healthy, stay healthy, he would give them a real great option playing the guard spot.
One last one on the interior line, and then one more for you after that, Bryan. For the center competition, then, you think it's Justin Evans that slides over to center? Or is there room for like a Sam Sledge maybe to take some reps in a competition in that position?
So obviously Sam, I think, is going to want to have, get a look. Played the position in high school at Creighton Prep. I think it's going to be one of those things. I think, even a Pyle. I think Pyle's even played the center position before, or at least has trained at it. You have Torres that's there now in the spring. I'm sure that he wants to go ahead and get a look at it. I mean, he told me specifically that he was recruited to play the center position by Coach Viola. So I think you've got some dudes that can do it. I mean, there aren't many guys that you and I can sit here and list out over the last decade and a half that were specifically recruited to play the center position.
Right.
But now at least you got a couple. You got Sledge and you got Torres. I mean, you got some of the guys that can do it. But it's just, I think even before that, I don't know, you got to go way back to a Jacob Hickman, where I don't know if you really, and I think obviously, Juergens, but he wasn't recruited to play center. No. He was moved to center. So I just, that's just not a position that Nebraska is put tremendous value on. You usually find a walk-on doing it. It wasn't really like a 4-star or 3-star guy. It was in the class. So a little bit different of a situation. And obviously Ben Scott, being a transfer guy, helped out a bunch, but that was just kind of a hole in the roster.
One more for you then, Bryan. You recently wrote about Tory Pitman up there at Omaha Central. Couple offers on the way for him after the last week or so. Who were those offers, and where does Nebraska stand with him?
Yeah, he just picked up a couple big. He just picked up one after my story too. I think he just picked up Missouri after that. Maybe it was Kansas State. I'm trying to remember who he just got the offer from, dude. It was just literally the day of my story. I think he had just picked up his latest offer, but Omaha Central defensive back, wide receiver, kind of athlete. Tory Pitman has great length. He's explosive. He has, kind of one of those things where he could go play multiple positions if he really wanted to. But I think he's kind of figuring out that he's better off just kind of, dialing it back here a notch, focusing on what's kind of going on the defensive side of the football. He had a great 7-on-7 camp recently down in Florida. I believe he picked up the offer from Miami, and that was where he was at. And then I think earlier on he picked up the offer from Iowa State because Caprice Keith obviously is there at his high school and kind of helped bridge a gap a little bit, with that offer. But Nebraska was the first one to offer. They offered him last February. He's really going to be one of those guys to watch here over the next year just because I think it's just going to continue to kind of click for him. And he's got great length and great athleticism. He could really be one of the top-rated guys to come out of the state in a long, long time.
And like you said, Nebraska is in first. Certainly doesn't hurt the Huskers' chances. Bryan, as always, appreciate the time. Good to catch up with you, my friend. Thanks for your time. We'll be pointing people to Husker Online to check out your work. Hope to catch up again soon.
Yep. Later, guys. We'll see you.